Hello and welcome to another captaincy video from Fantasy Football Scouts. Game week 5 was a great week for our tips last week, especially those who backed Spurs assets, in particular Harry Kane. Can we continue this form in game week 6? Joining me to consider the options is David. David, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing better than I was last week. Obviously missed out with a tooth-related injury, which I had two free transfers, so I was able to spend one of those transferring it out,
Oh, good.
and back stronger now. So yeah, and funnily enough, because I was off ill like all of last week, I put barely any thought into my moves and my captaincy. I captained Harry Kane, so I'm very happy.
Well, I put lots of thought into mine and Captain Harry Kane. So, same result really, but it just goes to show that sometimes it pays to just do what feels right, and obviously
Oh yeah.
Harry Kane felt right. As we'll discuss, he's potentially a good. Well, I'd say potentially he's a great captaincy option this week as well. But more of that in a minute. I understand we've got some Champions League coverage on Fantasy Football Scout. Do you want to just say a bit about that before we move on?
Yeah, so obviously the Champions League is back tonight, which I'm sure everyone's very happy about. The elite level competition is back after, well, it feels like only 5 minutes since it finished, but to have the group stages back, which I know everybody loves, and they're always really fun for fantasy, is really great. And we've teamed up with UEFA's official fantasy game, so it's not too late to sign up to play that game. And also, if you want any tips and advice on the best players to have, then we'll have an article on site later today and across the deadline as well for you to check out some of the best players. So yeah, don't forget to sign up. Don't forget to see what tips and advice we've got.
Okay, moving back to FPL, the small matter of the captaincy to consider. I think for many people, they're going to look at the fixture list and they're just going to say Salah or indeed Mane. Liverpool at home to Sheffield United. Salah and Mane can't stop bringing in points. And Sheffield United have failed to impress. They're not the force they were last season. So yeah, I mean Salah or in brackets Mane look the best bets for the captaincy surely this week. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the fact that they're at home obviously is a big thing compared to some of the other assets that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Not all of them obviously are at home, and Liverpool at Anfield is well, it's just formidable,
Yeah.
task for Sheffield United to have to take on. Completely agree that they aren't as good as they were last year defensively, and I think largely that's down to Dean Henderson. Sheffield United last season, I think, before all the clean sheets they kept, I think a lot of people who perhaps maybe didn't delve into the numbers as much as maybe some others would have kind of assumed that their XGC was often quite good, but actually it really wasn't. They would give up lots of big chances, but Dean Henderson had the second best XG prevented in the whole division last year, i.e. he was making incredible enough saves to keep Sheffield United in games. Obviously not there anymore. Aaron Ramsdale has come in, and I wouldn't. He's not a bad keeper, but he's just no Dean Henderson. And that obviously makes a big difference on their ability to keep clean sheets. I mean, the thing is that the stats that they're posting so far, they're not like the worst in the division by any stretch. In fact, they've got an XGC of 5.63 so far. But they still conceded 7 goals, and they're going away to Anfield. So if there's one place where you're probably going to concede more goals than you'd like, it's probably going to be there, right? Then in terms of the players that we're looking at, Salah and Mane, it is tricky, but I mean, I think to be honest, not very many people have both, so I think it's only really tricky to say which one's the better asset if you have both. I mean, some people have both. So then that person, if you're that person, I don't really envy you because it's quite hard to tell them apart right now. If you look at some of the raw numbers, Salah's got 19 shots in the box, Mane's got 13, so they're both in the top sort of 5 or 6 for that one. Salah actually top, sorry, I should say. But that's normal, right? Like we always know that Salah's going to shoot more in the box. Then Mane is ahead for big chances with 7-4. But again, that's pretty normal. Mane's second best in the whole division for that, behind only Calvert-Lewin. And then when we look at shots on target, Salah's got 11, Mane's got 8. So Salah's more likely to get a shot on target, and he's in the top 3 for that particular stat. But then when we look at the XG for those, because obviously he's had so many big chances. Mane is second in the whole division for XG non-penalty. So take the penalties out of the equation, then Mane looks pretty good. His minutes per XGI is the best in the league. Again, that's with him not being the penalty taker in this team. But Salah's on penalties.
Yeah.
So, and you can't take that away from him.
I always find that quite amusing, isn't it, when people say, yeah, but if you take penalties away from Vardy, he won't get any points. But he is on penalties.
Yeah, you'd have to ring up Brendan Rodgers and offer him a handsome sum for
Yeah.
Vardy to come off penalties, wouldn't you? So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So I think if you've got to pick between the two, that's tough. But if but chances are you've probably only got one of them. So then really it comes down to how does that Liverpool player compare with probably a Spurs player, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
And the comparison, I mean, well, we're going to come on to the Spurs player. But the thing is that those, I've just given you some of the stats in terms of how those two players compare to the rest of the division for some key attacking stats. They're top 5 for pretty much all of them. So captaining one of those players isn't going to really be the end of the world. And I suppose the other thing just to consider, I guess, is ownership and effective ownership.
Yeah.
So far, our captain poll has only been running since Monday night, so it's it's quite youthful. It's not been around too long, and obviously doesn't take into account maybe any Champions League injuries. We will probably reset it if a big one comes in. But either way, in the early hours, Salah is like miles ahead at the top of this captain poll. 47% of Fantasy Football Scout readers so far say they're going to captain him. 20% say they're going to captain Kane. So for all the stats that we've talked about, I think possibly it could even come down to that. When you're picking a captain, sometimes you want to, if you see a guy that's getting captained by lots of people and you own him, or maybe you don't own him, to be honest, whether or not you own him is irrelevant. In terms of whether or not you're going to sign him and then captain him, you sometimes have to sort of check, is that a good option? And if it is a good option and it's not a bad option, then maybe just go with it. The time when you should maybe look outside of who's the guy who's got the biggest backing is maybe when you think that the person who's like second or third could do significantly better.
Yeah.
And it's kind of difficult to argue that with like hand on heart. I definitely think that Kane will outscore Salah by 10 points or something. It's very, very hard to say that. So when we consider how much backing he's getting already from like-minded managers, it might just be enough to sort of just tick that box. Salah, next question. But I mean, it's not as simple as that. There are some great options also, which we should talk about. But it's worth thinking about that effective ownership.
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying, I think this is the week where you, for the captaincy, you have to look comparing not just Mane and Salah, but also them against the Spurs assets, because Kane and Son, who we'll come on to shortly, they can't stop scoring, but also they can't stop assisting each other. So they're getting a whole bunch of points there. Every goal Son will score. Well, who's assisted? It looks like it's Harry Kane. So you're getting those points coming in. We've got some stats on the screen which show expected goal involvement, comparing those key Spurs and key Liverpool assets. And Kane is top. Expected, he's actually scored 5. We'll come on to his chance creation shortly, but expected goal involvement is just over 5 as well. So he's not overperforming or underperforming. He is just performing as he should be. Shots on target 13. So all of that is better than Salah. So Salah has scored 1 more goal, but his expected goal involvement is marginally less at 4.93, and his shots on target is marginally less at 11. So he's they're both the standouts really, and I think it's between those two. But that is not to discount Mane. If you have Mane instead of Salah, just captain Mane, or you're faced with that Mane v Kane choice. I would probably toward the Liverpool guys at this stage, but that is not to discount the amazing potential of Son and Kane. Son, incidentally, has scored 7 goals, but his expected goal involvement is 3.31. So he is, I hate to say he's overperforming.
Because the fantasy community again,
because the fantasy community will go, oh my God, Son's amazing. How dare. But the stats say that he is overperforming. Yeah. Whether he is in reality, we'll leave it up to the viewer and the listener.
Well, the bottom line is, when you say overperforming, that doesn't necessarily mean that's a reason not to captain him. No. It's just a fair and accurate observation. Yeah. Some players overperform on their XG if they're good players, and Son's a good player. Yeah. So
the key for me though is big chances conceded. Just 5. That's Villa and Burnley. They are the best. They are on paper the best defences at the moment. Yet Burnley have conceded 8. So it's sort of the if you're looking at the goals they've conceded, that sort of the stats mask that, and because Tarkowski's been out, me as well. So it looks like they're getting back to the sort of Burnley that they should be. Nick Pope is there obviously as well. So I look at Burnley and compare it with Sheffield United. Now Sheffield United have conceded 8 big chances and they've conceded 7 goals. So they're pretty much, they're pretty much doing what they should be according to the underlying stats. So points that doesn't necessarily point to any regression or they're going to concede more. Whereas Burnley, I just think 8 goals conceded, but they're one of the best defences alongside Villa so far this season. That makes me think that Salah and Mane have the better fixture. But let's move on to Spurs. I think it's. I mean, we've touched on some of the stats there, and that is not to discount the power of Son and Kane to be captaincy options here. And what you can see there, some of the stats we've got on the screen. I mean, they can't stop scoring, but they also can't stop assisting each other. So they are both great assets here. And I think the key stats there that point out, now Kane is the Kane of old. Shots inside the box, 16. 25 goal attempts. Shots on target, 13. This is huge. He's got minutes per goal attempts in the box every 27 minutes. But the thing that gets me is the chances created, 13. So he's posting sort of Kane of old stats plus De Bruyne stats. Yeah, he's all in one player. So for me, he is a good. I think it's a tough choice between Kane and Salah if you own both, and I think they're going to be the common players there. But then not to discount Son, because Son, his shots on target is 9, so it's a bit less than Kane. Chances created actually more, and he scored 7 goals. So lots of figures, lots of numbers. They can't stop scoring. They can't stop assisting. Salah can't stop scoring. Mane can't stop scoring. It's a welcome tough choice. But what do you think?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a nice dilemma to have. I mean, I actually have both Son and Kane because I think for all the things you just mentioned there, that is when you double up, in my opinion, especially on a premium selection there. And you're right with Kane. It's crazy. Like he, just to put some of those stats you mentioned just into some context, for his shots on target, 13, best in the league for Kane, and the big chances created, 7. That's best in the league. So he right now is a better creator than Kevin De Bruyne. He's a better creator than James Rodriguez. He's a better creator than Jack Grealish. Like he's just the best creator in the Premier League right now. So it's like they've replaced Eriksen with Kane and replaced the deep lying Kane with the old Kane. Yeah, it's so amazing.
Kane's been replaced by Kane, and Eriksen's replaced by Kane.
It's so good. It is so good. And I did an article on it that's on the site this morning. Is that clearly what Mourinho's done is he's realised that because we've been saying for ages, get Kane in the box more, and that was probably a bit of a blunt way of looking at it. We shouldn't really be too surprised that Mourinho had a more nuanced approach to fixing that problem than me and you. That's why he's in his job. And the idea was, rather than just get him in the box the whole time and telling him to stop dropping deep, coach him to drop deep at the right moments and then make sure he's in the box at the right moments. And the performance against West Ham is just indicative of what this new Kane is like, because he drops deep when the wingers, so that's Son and it was Bergwijn at that particular occasion, but it's going to be Gareth Bale next week probably. Hardly the worst guy to run beyond you. When they make those runs behind and there's space in midfield, that's when he'll drop deep and play a pass and obviously assist inside the first minute. But then at the same time, he still knows how to spot space in the box. He saw Ogbonna was exposed on the back post because Cresswell was up the pitch. So all he had to do is go and stand there and wait for Reguilon to put the ball in, nods it in for a goal. So he is just a complete player right now. And I'd argue that even though he's a forward, he's a better option than Son because, even though Son is creating more chances, Kane is creating bigger chances. So Kane's already matched his best ever assist tally for a season.
I know.
It was 7. He got that maybe 3 years ago. And 14, 15, 16, 17 season, he got 7 assists. Well, he's already got that after 5 games now.
Now, De Bruyne last season, I think it was 20 assists. And he
hasn't got far to go.
Kane's a third of the way there, and we've only had 5 games.
Yeah. And what I find so incredible about Kane is just to sort of compare him with Son again is obviously he's ahead in some of those stats there, the ones that I think is slightly more important. But he's also ahead on the XG, but he's also ahead on the XG non-penalty. So when you look at XG non-penalty over the first 5 matches, Kane is 3.62. So he's behind only Mane and Calvert-Lewin in that respect. right? So if he's third in the whole division for XG non-penalty, oh, and he also takes penalties. Like it's just he is so due a ridiculous campaign this year, which we kind of suspected over the summer, but it's amazing that it's happening with all this assist potential as well. It's so good, and I think on the Burnley situation, I would normally say, yeah, okay, that's a good point about Burnley. That yeah, they do have a good defense and they're getting better because they're getting some people back. The reason that they've conceded 5 big chances and that's the joint like best in the league is possibly because they've played one less game. So we kind of maybe have to sort of consider that a little bit, which I'm not saying it makes them a bad defence. It's just that's the reason why they're top. And Villa, of course, in a similar situation. The other thing is that also,
but of course, Man City and Manchester United aren't there. You see, so
yeah, exactly, yeah. So they're not a bad defence, but it's just a little bit of a kind of mitigating reason behind that. But the other thing is, even when Burnley are at their best, they really struggle to play Spurs. Spurs are like that one team that seem to always be able to just just kind of remove the fact that it's Burnley from the equation. So, like last season, like yes, the last time they went to Turf Moor, it was a 1-1 draw. Kane wasn't there, so I don't really want to kind of look at that too much. But in December last year, they beat Burnley 5-0, and that was a full strength Burnley team with me, Tarkowski, Pope, etc., etc. And then in Kane's last 2 trips to Turf Moor, because if you look at Spurs' last 3, he didn't play in the third of those. So in the last 3 games that Spurs went to Turf Moor, 2 of those Kane was there for. He scored 4 goals across those 2 games. So Kane does quite like playing against Burnley. So, I'm not completely decided on my captaincy yet, because you're absolutely right. Like on paper, when we look at all of these different numbers, the Liverpool asset, which in my team obviously is Salah, but could be Mane for others, has form and fixture, and Kane clearly has form and maybe not so nice a fixture, but Burnley have recorded these stats not playing their bogey team or other bogey player, which is Kane. So I can definitely see Kane going nuclear again this week, and so then anyone who's captained him would possibly be quite happy, considering the fact that at the moment he's quite far behind Salah in the captaincy poll. So I think there's a really, really strong case for Kane that perhaps might get a little bit overlooked because on paper it's Burnley, but he loves playing Burnley.
So a position like I'm in at the moment, I don't have a Salah. I'm planning to get him in, and I already have Kane. So I'm lowly in the ranks, and I think that could be an option for those that are low in the ranks. Is to wager. Well, you can get Salah's points, but not his captaincy points. But you can go for Kane, who might be captained a bit less, and it might move you up the rankings. I don't know. Have to look at ownership if you're one of those people who looks at ownership, because we don't know what's going to happen by the end of the week. Kane is obviously a huge bandwagon this week, going up in price already this week, and I suspect more coming. So yeah, they're great options. I don't know. I may go to the wire, Kane or Salah. I think great. I think Son and Mane are in the next tier to both of those assets, though. Adding penalties to it as well, adding the fact that Kane is basically now Kane of 3 years ago and De Bruyne. I think they just have the edge. But there are other options. So, I'm going to just call it now. It's Spurs v Liverpool for the captaincy.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But there are some others. There's some also-rans. And it's not quite barrel scraping time, because these are good players as well. And let's have a move on to Man City as well. So now I haven't got any stats really for Aguero, because he's only just come back. He's only played, 60 minutes he played? But we do for Sterling, and we do for De Bruyne, even though De Bruyne we think won't be available, but he could be. And I think what these stats here show that Sterling is doing the business. I think he's matched Salah for the last 2 game weeks in terms of actual FPL points. His goal attempts, he's top for goal attempts along with Mahrez and De Bruyne. His expected goals is not as high as Kane and Salah, so he's in that also ran category. But if you look here, the De Bruyne is chances created is 14. So as you know, their chief chance creator has gone, potentially gone for this next match. But then last season, Sterling absolutely hammered West Ham, and as I said, he's matched Salah so far. So Sterling's not an option to discount, and nor too is Aguero perhaps. But yeah, I'm not going to say are they better than the Liverpool Spurs assets, but do you think they are credible captaincy choices this week?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's Man City, so I mean they're always going to be in the conversation with good reason. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I can't really make a case for them above some of those other players, and some people might think we're getting blinded by the big hauls, but as we've covered, I think in quite a lot of detail, the big hauls have been backed up by ridiculously great underlying stats, so we feel like they're sustainable. If I was hard pressed to say, do I think Sterling's current output is that sustainable? I would find it very hard to just say absolutely yes, because as you've mentioned there, Man City's chief chance creator is potentially not available. And then when you look at the numbers that he's produced over that over the games he's played, Sterling's had 7 shots in the box, 1 big chance. Kane's had like 6 or 7. And Sterling's only had 4 shots on target. Kane's had 16 or 15, something like that. Double figures, right? So he's miles off sort of like a position where you could say he's definitely going to haul, which is why I wouldn't captain him. The other thing is, I mean, everybody looks at the West Ham fixture and thinks that's a good fixture, and they just conceded 3 to Spurs, so I totally get it. The only thing that I find really, really interesting is the fact that actually when you look at how well they've been defending in terms of like just across the 5 games they've played, their XGC so far is 5.4, which actually is the best of any team that's played 5 games. It's really strange. So because the only 2 teams that have a better XGC right now are Villa and Burnley, and obviously they've played one less game. So I'm not going to say they're going to keep a clean sheet against Man City, because that would just I'm not that brave.
No.
The 3 goals they conceded to Spurs, it was in a 15-minute spell where they just looked all over the place. And then once they kind of figured things out a little bit, Spurs found it a little bit harder to get through. So it's just something to keep an eye on. Like if West Ham are able to produce that XGC score in a run of games where they've had a horrible run of games. They played Newcastle, Leicester, Wolves, and then Spurs and Arsenal, right? So to record those numbers against those teams, that is impressive. And to be perfectly honest, when their fixtures turn, I very much got my eye on getting a West Ham defender, because if they can have decent XGC against the tough teams, maybe then they start keeping clean sheets against the other ones. So taking that kind of little tangent into consideration with the fact that Sterling's form from an underlying stats perspective is nowhere near Spurs and Liverpool key assets, then it's a no from me for this week.
Okay, let's move on to Everton. Obviously not to be discounted as well, and I think they have perhaps the better fixture than all of the other assets we've already mentioned. Calvert-Lewin is in form and Rodriguez is in form. I've singled those 2 out. Richarlison's obviously suspended because of his red card. In terms of chances created this season, you got Rodriguez on 15. This is mega. Calvert-Lewin, shots inside the box, 17 with 7 goals. Every time with Calvert-Lewin, he's going to score. Every time I watch an Everton game, Calvert-Lewin will score. He looks like it. He looks like he's in the positions there, and he's against the notorious high line of Southampton. Now, I thought Southampton had sort of sorted their defence out a little bit, but obviously Chelsea was a great game for Chelsea there, and obviously they came back. But I think I don't know. It just looks like this. I think if you're betting against Spurs and Liverpool doing well this week, Calvert-Lewin or Rodriguez, I think, are very viable captaincy options. But what do you think of them before we move on to some of the others?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're starting to prove very reliable, aren't they? Especially Calvert-Lewin.
Yeah.
Calvert-Lewin just scores everywhere. Rodriguez seems to do better at home in terms of actually delivering on what he's offering. Away from home, he's still very much a chance creator, but he's just not quite as much of a goal threat. For whatever reason. I mean, that's just the early data that I've sort of been seeing through the comparison tool. I think, Southampton, I think it being at Southampton is good for Everton, because Southampton, I think, are always have been more susceptible to conceding goals at home under Hasenhüttl than they do away, because when they're at home, obviously they want to try and play on the front foot because they have the players to do that. So they often stretch themselves out of positions that would allow them to defend properly. And the Spurs game is just absolutely classic example of that, isn't it? Where they just got absolutely done on the break. And I think Everton can take advantage of that too. So yeah, I think they're solid players to own. Do I think that they're gonna go nuclear, go explosive?
Yeah.
Perhaps not, because I think they're the type of players that Calvert-Lewin's going to get you like 7 points every week, and that's
Yeah.
really nice. He's kind of like, I mean, I say the new Jimenez. That seems silly, bearing in mind that Jimenez scored last night as well. But
Yeah.
you know what I mean,
Points.
yeah, he's the new postman effectively. He's always going to deliver. Does that make him captainable in a week when there's not really an outstanding captain candidate? Maybe, but when we're looking at players who we know are kind of capable of getting these double-figure hauls, it's hard to say, definitely go with him over one of those guys. So yeah, nice options to own, but I think I'd still be looking at Liverpool and Spurs for the captaincy.
Okay, let's just have a look at some of the other fixtures. I've just pulled out some, potentials for the barrel scrapers. Those will want to be different. Villa v Leeds, obviously Villa in great form, but these are tough to call games. I think Villa, Leeds, Manchester United against Chelsea. Obviously, Fernandes always a good option. Werner, he's starting to hit form. I can't really call Manchester United v Chelsea though. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Arsenal v Leicester, another tough to call game. Potentially Vardy could get a hatful if he's back from injury. Potentially Aubameyang could do well as well. Leicester's defence is new, patched up. They've got different players. It's different, but I do think there are a couple of others for differential options. Maupay against West Brom. Now West Brom are still the worst defence at the moment. They are still the whipping boys. Conceded 14 big chances. XG conceded is 11.16, so that's the worst by miles. Manchester United are second there with the XG conceded of around 8. So I think he's an option. And Jimenez, we saw there was a couple of moments in the game against Leeds. Now Leeds made it tough. They pressed so quickly. But there was a couple of moments when he actually scored the goal. He was trying to find a place to shoot from and eventually scored. But there was a moment around quarter of an hour before that. He was doing exactly the same thing and Leeds closed him down. And I don't know if Newcastle are capable of closing him down there. So I think this could be a rare time when Jimenez perhaps gets magical 2 goals instead of 1. So he is an option against Newcastle, I do think.
Yeah.
But,
well, I mean, I'm not going to captain him, but while we're talking about Wolves, Podence is a hold, for example, for this game, because Newcastle, I mean, their XGC first 5 games is 8.54, so that's the third worst. So certainly they're capable of getting turned over. The only thing that would just perhaps, I don't know, Wolves seem not as devastating on the attack as they were.
No.
I mean, the thing is that we are kind of, with the best respect to Wolves, kind of scraping the barrel at this point. So, it's interesting. They don't seem to be quite. They're still getting points on the board because they're a good team, but in terms of being the free-flowing, exciting attacking team that they were last season, I think it would take a little bit of a while for them to ramp back up to that. Because they've got new players coming into the system. It just takes a little bit of time to kind of get that all to click into place. So
I mean, I think this is one of those weeks where, I mean, you're really looking at Spurs or Liverpool ideally, and then there are some other very good options. But Spurs and Liverpool, I think, are going to dominate the captaincy thoughts this week, and quite understandable in the poll. When we get those, overall and effective ownership stats in, which take into account the captaincy, I think we're going to see those two. Understandably dominating the captaincy. Just before we go, I want to mention the members area. A lot of the stats we've been showing in this episode have come from the members area. They'll be looking at expected goals. We'll also be looking at big chances, all those kinds of underlying stats that are key to our decisions really, and have been for a number of years there. So do check out that. But for now, David, thanks so much for joining us. So glad you're feeling better and tooth has been transferred out, and good luck with your captaincy decision.
Cheers. Thanks very much, and the same to you, Joe.